Spain once held the world in its hands. In the 16th century, it was not Britain that commanded the seas, but Spain. For the first time in history, one crown ruled a global empire stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia. Its territories were so vast that people said the sun never set on the Spanish Empire, a phrase the British would later borrow. Yet this unmatched power hid a strange weakness. The richest empire the world had ever known collapsed beneath the weight of its own treasure. And that fall still echoes today, because sudden floods of money can deceive even the wisest nations into mistaking fortune for real wealth. When Spanish ships reached the New World after the voyage of 1492, they stumbled into what seemed like an infinite jackpot. Gold and silver appeared in impossible quantities, more than any European kingdom had ever imagined. The conquest of Mexico in the early 1500s destroyed the Aztec Empire and opened the silver mines of Zacatecas. A few decades later, the defeat of the Inca Empire in Peru revealed the Mountain of Potosi, a mine so large it was called the mountain that eats men. For more than a century, Potosi fed a constant flow of treasure ships crossing the Atlantic. Between the early 1500s and the mid-1600s, Spain imported around 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold. To grasp the scale, that was more silver than all of Europe had mined in the previous 1,000 years combined. This treasure changed the shape of the world. From the ports of Seville and Cadiz, Spanish ships carried bullion east toward the Mediterranean, north to the Low Countries, and west across the Pacific to Manila, where silver was exchanged for Chinese silk and porcelain. The result was the birth of the first global economy, with Spain at its very heart. When Jamestown, the first English colony in North America, was founded in the early 1600s, little more than a swamp clinging to survival. Mexico City already had universities, printing presses, and grand cathedrals. Lima was thriving. St. Augustine in Florida, founded by Spain in the 1560s, was the first permanent European settlement in what would become the United States, established 4 decades before Jamestown. While Britain and France struggled with failed colonies, Spain was building the infrastructure of empire. And yet, beneath the glory, something fragile was forming. The empire that glittered with silver was hollow within. Spain confused treasure with strength. The silver was real, but the way it was used turned power into poison. Prices across the kingdom began to explode. Between the early 1500s and the early 1600s, inflation soared. Prices quadrupled in a single century. Ordinary Spaniards found bread, cloth, and everyday goods harder to afford, even as their country sat atop mountains of silver. Why? Because money holds value only when it is scarce enough to be trusted. When coins multiply faster than goods, the value of each coin collapses. Imagine a town where bread costs 1 coin. Suddenly 10 times more coins arrive, but the number of bakers and loaves stays the same. Bakers see that people have more money, so they charge more. Soon bread costs 2, 3, even 4 coins. Not because it became better, but because the coins themselves are worth less. That was Spain's fate. Economists would later call it the price revolution, the first great wave of global inflation triggered by too much silver chasing too few goods. But inflation did not strike everyone equally. The nobles, merchants, and bankers, those who handled silver first, profited before prices rose. Ordinary workers, earning fixed wages, were left behind. The result was cruel irony. The more silver Spain brought home, the poorer its people felt. Wealth that should have been a blessing became a curse. The mistakes went deeper still. Instead of investing their treasure in productive industries, the Spanish crown and nobility spent it on imports. Italian merchants, Dutch traders, and German craftsmen grew rich selling luxuries to Spain, all paid for with American silver. The empire's own industries began to wither. Why build factories or develop trade networks when the treasure fleets would always arrive? Spain became a consumer, not a producer, while its rivals reinvested every coin they earned or stole. And then came the wars. The Habsburg kings saw themselves as defenders of Catholicism after the Reformation, and that mission demanded a fortune. Silver from Mexico and Peru paid for campaigns against the Ottoman Turks, funded armies to crush the Dutch revolt, and supported Catholic forces in the French wars of religion. The Spanish crown poured wealth into the 30 Years' War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in European history. Even the mighty Spanish Armada of 1588, a massive fleet sent to conquer Protestant England, was built and launched with American treasure. When the Armada failed, the financial blow was staggering. So where did all that gold and silver go? Onto battlefields, into ships, and into debt. Spain was not only spending what it had, it was spending what it expected to receive. German banking dynasties like the Fuggers and later Genoese financiers advanced enormous loans to the crown, secured by future shipments of silver. On paper, it seemed brilliant. As long as the mines of Potosi kept producing, the silver would keep flowing. In reality, it was a trap. If a fleet was delayed, wrecked in a storm, or captured by pirates, the entire system collapsed. Spain defaulted, again and again, 4 times in the 16th century alone: 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. Imagine being the richest empire in the world and declaring bankruptcy every few decades. That was Spain's reality. And into this fragile system sailed the pirates. They were not just outlaws, they were instruments of economic war. England and the Netherlands understood that striking the treasure fleets could shatter Spain's power. In the 1580s, Francis Drake circled the globe, plundering Spanish galleons and returning home with treasure worth half of England's annual income. In 1628, the Dutch privateer Piet Hein captured an entire Spanish fleet off the coast of Cuba, silver worth 11 million guilders. Each loss was more than a naval defeat. It was a financial earthquake. Spain had mortgaged its future, and when storms or pirates took its ships, creditors across Europe went unpaid. Meanwhile, England and the Netherlands used the stolen silver to build their own futures. They reinvested it in navies, banks, and trade companies, the solid structures of new empires. Spain's treasure, meant to secure its glory, became the foundation of its rivals' rise. Its lifeline turned into its Achilles' heel. By the early 1600s, Spain still looked mighty on maps. Its empire stretched across oceans. Its kings lived in glittering palaces. Its cathedrals overflowed with gold. But the empire was already sick. Inflation had eroded prosperity, debt had chained the crown to foreign bankers, and piracy had turned the Atlantic into a battlefield. For ordinary Spaniards, wealth was an illusion. Prices rose, wages stagnated, and taxes climbed to pay for wars that never ended. The empire that once ruled the world was feeding on itself. That is how the richest nation on earth began to unravel. Not through invasion or rebellion, but through the quiet corrosion of its own success. Spain had mistaken silver for strength, money for meaning, and treasure for wealth. Its story is a mirror that still reflects our age. For when easy money flows too fast, the same illusion returns, the belief that prosperity can be mined, borrowed, or conjured from thin air. And history whispers the warning: it never lasts. Spain's rulers could have turned their treasure into lasting strength. They could have built industries, funded innovation, or created fair systems of taxation. Instead, they treated silver as an endless spring, something that would always refill itself. From the middle of the 1500s onward, Spanish monarchs became addicted to borrowing against their future. The Fuggers in Germany, and later the Genoese banking houses, extended immense loans secured by shipments of silver that had not yet reached Spain. It was a cycle of expectation and delay. Fleets arrived, debts were repaid, new loans were signed, and the process began again. But if the ships were late or lost, everything collapsed, and they were often lost. The empire declared bankruptcy 4 times within 50 years: 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607. Each default rippled across Europe, shaking the foundations of global finance. Imagine a nation that controlled half the world's trade yet could not pay its bills. That was Spain. It had more silver than any kingdom in history, and yet found itself perpetually broke. War devoured everything. The Habsburg monarchs saw themselves as the defenders of the true faith after the Protestant Reformation, and that identity came with the ruinous cost. American silver financed wars against the Ottomans, funded campaigns to crush the Dutch revolt, and paid for endless skirmishes against Protestant England. The Spanish Armada of 1588 consumed fortunes equal to billions today, and its defeat brought more than humiliation. It triggered a financial collapse that rippled from Madrid to Antwerp. But the wars continued. The 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 turned Europe into a graveyard and drained Spain's treasury at a terrifying pace. Each new campaign required more silver, more loans, and more desperate promises of repayment. The empire was trapped in its own design, a system built on conquest that now demanded endless conquest to survive. Even worse, the money rarely stayed in Spain. Bullion flowed in only to flow right back out again. Italian shipbuilders, Flemish traders, and German bankers were paid in silver, enriching the very economies that would later surpass Spain. The crown consumed what others produced. Every treasure fleet that docked in Seville made foreign creditors richer and Spain poorer. The empire's merchants imported luxury goods instead of exporting value. Its people learned to wait for ships instead of building businesses. Dependency became habit, and then came the sea wolves, the privateers and pirates who smelled weakness behind Spain's gold. Treasure fleets were not just symbols of power, they were lifelines. Each convoy carried the empire's wages, taxes, and debt payments across the ocean. Losing one was not a simple setback, it was national disaster. In 1628, the Dutch privateer Piet Hein captured an entire fleet near Cuba, 11 million guilders worth of silver. The blow shattered Spain's credit. Lenders panicked, payments stopped, and the myth of infinite wealth cracked a little further. Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and countless English corsairs, all sanctioned by Queen Elizabeth, turned piracy into policy. Every galleon taken from Spain was a double victory. Plunder for England, paralysis for Madrid. Each lost ship weakened confidence in Spanish credit, pushed interest rates higher, and deepened dependence on foreign loans. The sea became a battlefield of finance. Spain's empire was not defeated in open war, but slowly strangled through its own fragility. While Spain mortgaged its future, its rivals invested theirs. The Dutch built the Amsterdam Stock Exchange and founded the world's first joint stock trading company. The English created the East India Company and expanded their merchant fleets. They understood that systems, not silver, created power. They reinvested their stolen Spanish bullion into banks, shipyards, and global trade networks. Every ounce of silver they seized became capital that generated more. Spain's coins built other nations' empires. By the early 1600s, the map still showed Spain as enormous, its territories stretching from the Philippines to Peru. But this was a mirage. Inflation had hollowed domestic life, debt had enslaved the monarchy to creditors, and piracy had made the Atlantic a minefield. The empire's wealth existed mostly on paper, counted in loans that might never be repaid. The people bore the quantum, prices soared, wages stagnated, and taxes climbed to fund wars that promised glory, but delivered hunger. The empire looked strong only from a distance. As the century advanced, the decay became visible. The once mighty armada was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Bankruptcy after bankruptcy destroyed faith in the crown. Foreign banks demanded higher interest. The 30 Years' War consumed what little remained. By the 1700s, Spain was still large, but its influence had drained away. The same treasure that had once dazzled Europe now anchored it to decline. And yet, Spain's story is not merely a tale of kings and coins. It is a warning about the illusion of abundance. When money floods an economy faster than real productivity grows, the effect is always the same. The rich grow richer, the middle erodes, and ordinary people pay the price. In the 1600s, Spain's peasants watched silver pour into Seville while the price of bread climbed beyond their reach. They lived in the richest empire on earth and went hungry. Centuries later, the pattern repeats in quieter ways. Modern economies print money instead of mining it, but the logic is unchanged. When new wealth appears faster than new value, the system buckles. Inflation, debt, speculation, they are the ghosts of the same old story. Spain's treasure fleece may be gone, but their shadow lingers in modern finance, in bubbles that rise and burst with predictable rhythm. Even piracy has its echoes. Spain concentrated its fortune in massive convoys that carried everything at once. Today, we concentrate wealth in giant corporations, in too-big-to-fail banks, in fragile systems of debt. When one ship sank in 1628, it shook the empire's credit. When one financial institution fails today, entire economies tremble. The mechanism is different, but the fragility is the same. Spain's fall teaches a simple truth. Treasure is not wealth. Silver is not security. Real power comes from systems that create value over time, from production, innovation, and the discipline to sustain both. Spain believed that owning half the world and controlling endless mines meant everlasting strength. In truth, it meant fragility. Its rivals, England, the Netherlands, and later France, grasped the deeper lesson. They learned to build wealth that could renew itself. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. The Spanish Empire collapsed not from invasion, but from its own illusions. It mistook the glitter of silver for the substance of prosperity. And every society that makes the same mistake, flooding its economy with easy money while neglecting the structures that give it meaning, walks the same path. The details may change, but the ending rarely does. Spain's story closes with a whisper that feels uncomfortably modern. The richest empire in the world, undone not by poverty, but by excess. And in that quiet lesson lies a question every age must answer for itself. When wealth comes too easily, so will we build with it or drown in it?